Thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Is space exploration about to enter a new age of discovery, or are geopolitical considerations going to usher in a new area for great power competition? Our guest looks at the 15th century to help answer this critical question. Chaitanya Giri is a consultant for science, technology, innovation policy, and diplomacy at the Research and Innovation System for Developing Countries in New Delhi, India. He is also a fellow with Giri here in Canada. Chaitanya, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here on your program. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. And you are coming to us via New Delhi, so I thank you for the time considerations. I know it's a little bit later in the day than it is here in Canada. First, give us a little bit of a sense how 2022 and this new era of space exploration is like the 15th century. Give us a little bit of a sense of where you're coming from on that.
So if you look at the 15th century, you would see several Western European countries and powers and monarchies of that time vying to get access to the new world, which today is the Americas. Especially if you look at the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Spanish, so these two monarchies at that time decided that Spain would have access to all the landmass that they would discover east of a certain meridian that passes through Brazil, today modern day Brazil, whereas Portugal will look at all the landmass on the east side of that meridian. Now, if we look at the constitution of South Americas today, you would find most of the countries have Spanish roots dating back to 15th century. Whereas you would look at Brazil, it has the Portuguese roots. You come to North America, you'd find the French and the British exploring several territories, and the history is well known in Canada. Very similarly, today we are seeing the United States, China, Russia, and Europe vying for newer areas on the moon, on Mars. They want to occupy real estate in the Earth's orbits, in the lunar orbits, and so much so that just a few weeks ago, the United States Air Force announced that they would be launching something known as a cislunar patrol system, where they will be patrolling the space between the Earth and the moon.
Right.
This sounds very similar to what had happened in the 15th century, where countries and monarchies who were economically powerful enough to venture out into the open ocean, into the blue oceans, they ventured out, they captured new territories. Similarly, we are now capturing newer territories, not here on Earth, but in outer space.
So what's the implication for how space exploration is done based on the analysis you just gave us?
So in the past 60 odd years, since space exploration began, we've seen a duopoly which really mattered in the entire pursuit. This duopoly was the United States and Soviet Union, which is today's Russia. Now, with increasing geopolitical and geoeconomic multipolarity, there are numerous players coming in. And exploration, which was largely confined to scientific pursuits, today has acquired economic connotations. And these economic connotations are very much linked to national economies. They are very much linked to national aspirations and geopolitics, as we call it, is getting extended into outer space, getting transformed into a three-dimensional phenomenon known as astropolitics.
Right, right. Well, we're going to explore that and other questions with our guest after we take a brief break. Certainly the geopolitics and the economics of it are something we're interested here at Boom and Bust about. Well, our guest will return after the break. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm Tony Clement here with Chaitanya Giri. He is a consultant for science, technology, innovation, policy, and diplomacy. He's also working and writing with CIGI here in Canada. Chaitanya, talking a little bit about the great powers competing. You're talking about Russia, USA, China, obviously, and even you're coming to us from New Delhi. India has launched rockets as well. So give us a sense of how you see that competition going. What can we expect, or what is going on even right now with this competition in near space and in outer space by these great powers?
The competition is escalating. The contest is escalating. There are very strong factions getting developed. If you look at the US's modus operandi, you would find that the US is accumulating and gathering all possible friends with whom it can share technical, financial, and human resources. And all these resources between the US and its partners are getting pooled under an agreement known as the Artemis Accords. And these are being put into the pursuits, common pursuits for setting up infrastructure and connectivity infrastructure between Earth and the Moon, and Moon and Mars. Likewise, the Russians and Chinese also have very similar plans, although they haven't got many countries as a signatory as the US has with the Artemis Accords. But these two are putting their forces together to go to the moon and set up something known as the International Lunar Research Station, which will constitute of a space station that will revolve in the lunar orbit, as well as they'll set up bases on the moon. So these are competing infrastructure coming up. There's a lot of money that is being put into these pursuits because there is an expectation on return on investment.
Right.
So,
yeah,
like
go
for
ahead.
instance,
Yeah.
in the next 10 years, it is estimated that nearly 40 to 50 billion dollars are expected as ROI, return on investment, just from lunar exploration.
So this is interesting because obviously there seems to be two goals. There are lunar bases, either orbiting the moon or on the moon itself, and then exploratory missions to Mars as well. And it seems like there's two separate systems of alliances, as you're describing, two systems of alliances being built up. One by China, one by USA. Is that what you're seeing?
It looks like that, yeah.
Interesting. Now, the other aspect of this, of course, and you've written about this, is we now have the private sector involved in space projects, exploration, and so on. SpaceX comes to mind, and it's in our world. It's not just NASA; it's also these private companies. How does that change things?
See, just like every startup which needs research grants at the very beginning of its pursuit, or at the very beginning of its inception, grants come from governmental monies. Whereas as the startup and the technology that it is cultivating, as it matures, it then starts attracting equity investments or private investments. Exactly a similar thing has happened in terms of space exploration, where in the initial years, it were the government and the government space agencies that carried the space programs on their shoulders. And eventually, they started cultivating and nurturing numerous private companies who would become contractors to build certain systems and components for the space program. Today, after gathering experience of over few decades, the private sector is now ready to stand on its own feet.
Right.
And this is what we are seeing almost everywhere in all advanced economies, including in North America, Europe, Russia, even China is rearing a lot of quasi-private companies. And why do I say quasi-private? Because there is always a governmental stake in all the private sector companies in China. So
we're just going to take a brief break. Chaitanya, hold that thought. And we're back. Chaitanya, could you please continue with your explanation?
So as I was saying, the private sector is maturing to an extent that it can pull off space missions entirely on its own. It has the necessary technological wherewithal. It has the means to pick up money from the capital market. And that's why we see they are assuming a greater role in this new space age, which I've been calling as Space 2.0. Mm-hmm. And since it is concomitant with Industry 4.0, the new technologies that the private sector is bringing in is very much different from what we've seen in the past. So there is an immense amount of artificial intelligence, robotics, there's immense amount of machine learning, and it is less mechanical and more digital in nature.
So, of course, for those of us old enough to remember, not yourself, but perhaps myself, we had the space race in the 1960s between the USSR and the USA. Are we going to see kind of a space race amongst the private sector companies that are involved in this with machine learning, AI, robotics, all of these technologies deployed?
Yeah, we'll be seeing another space race, but this time it will be multipolar. The intensity will be higher in the race between the China-led coalition and the US-led coalition. But there will be other players like India who are neutral, who do not belong to either of the blocs. Right. Then there are countries like France, and each of them will vie for a pie of this cake. The race will be intense, but at the same time, such intense phases of technological competitions have always pushed the envelope for humanity. So, for instance, all the technologies that came out of the Second World War eventually helped us humans understand the DNA. The discovery was DNA was in 1958. Semiconductors came immediately after the World War. The space age came after the World War. The age of plastics came after the Second World War. So these are tumultuous times in terms of conflict on the planet. But as we cross this phase in the history, we'll be jumping into an entirely new world.
You've written about the space economy and how it should include planetary protection. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
We've just come out of a pandemic, or we are almost coming out of it. And we've seen the fact that we still don't understand how microorganisms operate. How do we survive with such lethal microorganisms here on Earth? Exactly the same way, we still don't know what happens to microorganisms if they are taken to outer space and brought back. So all the words that we've heard in the past 2 years, which is contamination, quarantine, isolation, these are all, they have always been used in human space flight. Mm-hmm. So we do not want to forward contaminate celestial bodies, taking microorganisms from here to all these celestial places. So we would want to prevent the forward contamination. And we would certainly would not want to bring microorganisms that have been exposed to extraterrestrial conditions, be it radiation, microgravity, and whatnot, and bring them back, because we would not know how they would change and how they would affect life here on Earth, for us as well as for other beings that have never been exposed to such uh, microorganisms that have lived in outer space. So that's why there is a immense need for us to take measures to protect the planet from such activities. Now, all this did not matter much during the first space age, because seldom did we go out in outer space. But with greater frequency, with more number of countries joining space exploration and carrying out space activities, the frequency with which microorganisms can be transmitted into outer space and brought back will be much, much higher.
Welcome back. We're here with our guest Chaitanya Giri, straight from New Delhi. Chaitanya, we're talking about the best way to protect the Earth and to move space exploration. What's the proper way to create these new agreements so that we can have peaceful and successful space exploration?
See, most of the space agreements that have been signed under the flagship of United Nations, they date back to 1960s and 70s. A lot has changed. A lot of water has flown since then. And these are new realities. So geopolitical multipolarity, greater number of countries that now have access to outer space. None of this were factored while drafting all those treaties. So it is about time that these treaties are revisited and a consensus is built despite the multipolarity, so that we do not so that we are not affected destructively by any of the advertent or inadvertent changes that we bring about to planet Earth through our economic activities in outer space. With economics, the frequency with which we go out there, the frequency of activities on the moon or in the Earth's orbit will be much higher. And none of the agreements are yet prepared to take care of this intense human footprint in outer space. So the treaties need to be revisited, maybe in the next 10 odd years, and a lot of regulation need to be put in terms of accountability, accountability of space agencies, accountability of private sector, and compensation mechanisms need to be drawn.
Is this going to be, obviously we're in a very troubling time back here on Earth with the invasion of Ukraine, really Russia becoming a pariah state for much of the world. Is this going to be doable given the state of great power competition and sides being taken that's happening on Earth right now?
We've had a similarly serious situation in the 1960s, just before the Apollo program began, and that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. So even at that time, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists had put the clock very close to 12 o'clock. So I think space should be one of the sectors that should be treated as a pressure release valve. All the cancellations that we've seen in terms of space missions, where the Russian Space Agency is not ready to cooperate with the European Space Agency or the American Space Agency, and likewise, all these cancellations need to be put aside. These are all reactionary measures, and space is something that unites. There is a lot of shared assets between the West and Russia. The best asset that we all know is the International Space Station. And in the pursuit of greater well-being of this planet Earth, space should be left aside, because this is not the time to extend geopolitics into outer space, because that will create havoc not only for these two countries, but also countries that really do not want to get involved in this conflict. So in that respect, space can be a detente mechanism even now.
We've got about 30 seconds left. I take it you're optimistic then that we can work these things out and move forward into space?
Yeah, I think it's very important not to be reactionary. And the scientific and the economic communities around the world are known to not be reactionaries. Uh, uh, I think better sense will prevail, and we'll go back to drawing board and start to do handshakes.
Well, as Winston Churchill once said, it's always better to jaw than to war. So I agree with you there. Chaitanya Giri, thanks for being on our program today.
Thank you.
Fascinating conversation with Chaitanya Giri there about space exploration, what's coming down the pipe, both for nations and for companies too. We'll be obviously very interested in this. Thanks for watching.